Hey guys! Time for some comfort food. Today we're making grilled cheese sandwiches and a frying pan in miniature. Hope you'll enjoy. For the frying pan, I first use some scrap clay to make the base. All you want to do is create a circle that's slightly wider at one side. Then once you have that, you want to bake it. Now there are two ways you can use it. If you don't have mold putty, you want to roll out a thin sheet of clay, add some cornstarch so it won't stick, and add it to the outside of this shape. What I did is that I used mold putty to make a mold, and then added the thin sheet of clay to the inside. I used large ball tools and a silicone tool to smooth it out. You want to try to avoid getting any dents, as a frying pan won't be bumpy. After baking, I took a piece of metal and made this basic shape for the handle. Folded in the sides for the piece that attaches to the frying pan, and then added polymer clay to the handle itself. Smooth that out, round off the edges and use a pointy dotting tool or needle tool to make a hole. Then bake. After baking, I added a tiny bit more clay to the frying pan itself, then added the handle to get a dent, and took off the handle, then baked. For the outside of the frying pan, I'm going to be using my F-Color enamel powder. What this is just a fine powder that melts when it gets hot, and creates this nice, glossy, enamel-like surface. If you don't have this, you can also use embossing powder for basically the same effect, or you can use acrylic paint, although you might be able to see the brush strokes. I added one coat at a time, then baked, added another coat, and continued until I was happy. I think I added about 4 coats. Next we're going to make the bread, and for this you want to take a light dough color, roll out a sheet of clay and cut out as many squares as you want slices of bread. I used my blade to give it the right shape, and then I used tin foil and a toothbrush to add some texture. Then add the last bit of texture using a fine needle tool. I do get a lot of questions about where I get my needle tools. The ones I use are usually not made for clay, and you don't need a special tool for this. The best type of needle tool would actually be a sewing needle, because you can get them in so many different thicknesses. For the stack of bread, you really only need to texture the top piece and then also any visible bits of the rest of them. For the cheese, I rolled a really thin sheet of pale yellow, then cut out a square and used my blade to add some texture. And you can then create the sandwiches. For the inside texture, I first used a larger needle tool to kind of define the cheese, and then used a fine needle tool for the texture on the bread. I used a toothbrush to press in a few areas, since after it's been grilled, it probably won't have a perfect shape. And then for the melted cheese, I just mixed that same pale yellow with liquid clay. This next bit is not completely necessary and may look a bit strange. I use a mold putty and a dotting tool to create kind of like a bumpy or rough mold. I then added some glaze and let that dry, and this is really just to create kind of like a clear texture that I can use as the melted butter or oil on the pan. For the shading, I did this in kind of 3 steps. For the first step, I added 2 shades of pastel around the edges, and this is the only step I used for the stack of bread. And since the clay has been baked, you want to apply this using a wet brush. Seal that with a matte glaze and move on to the next step. For this step I added 2 more shades of pastel even though I only filmed one of the shades. And this is to create most of the toasted or grilled look. I then sealed that with a matte glaze again, added a tiny bit of brown acrylic paint, and then added some glass glaze. To make the bag for the bread, I just used my bag sealer as well as a bag from some fruit or vegetables. And to make the butter, I mixed the cheese color with some more white and translucent, cut out a square, and added a tiny bit of texture using my X-Acto knife. I also used this spatula from a previous tutorial. Really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next tutorial.